Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammang sanghang namassami. So I'd like to welcome, we have some guests and visiting monastics from Beijing, as well as everyone who's come here for a Sunday talk today and meditation or practice afternoon. Again, Ajahn Lungpo Prasanno is away. He's in Canada visiting his mother, which is very nice. I wish them both and his family well, and the rest of us here holding the fort, looking after the place. So, just this morning, thinking a little bit about what I might say, or topic, somehow living in the monastery, the ongoing theme that always comes up in conversation, and it should do, is craving and variations on that theme, whether it's questions about ordaining or questions around, how we live, meditation issues, or discussions about things like things outside the monastery, how we relate to family, how we relate to the outside world, issues around that. And it always, and in a sense, this is the heart of, essentially why we're here. As the Buddha explained this whole process, none other than dukkha, which is an experience which is not pleasant, which arises because of craving. So it's right there in the heart of the experience. And then the fact that we have the capacity to understand it, go beyond it, and then there's a practical approach, a program for that, the middle way or the Eightfold Path. And so everything essentially that we're doing, whether it's our practices, the meditation, the monks' rules, the structures, is in a sense within those guidelines or those framework. So it's appropriate that essentially most of the things we talk about are to do with that. And even when we're doing stuff like buildings and practical stuff and travel arrangements, even then, what's it all for? It's for the purpose of finding creating and maintaining a situation where we can work with craving on so many levels. But the thing is, there's so much to understand about it. So it's so multi-layered, multifaceted. So just share a little story, a kind of funny little thing that happened about a month ago when I was traveling here. I came here, finally arrived here for the Rains Retreat, having done a very long journey. I came here via Thailand, you could say the long way round, which means to come here first, then to go to the East Coast, then to go to Europe and all around Europe, and then finally back here. Traveling with senior monks and visiting monasteries, so very nice. But I was kind of quite, as you can imagine, exhausted and a bit. I lost count of the airports and the connecting flights and the departure lounges. And so the very last one, I was literally like, yes, it was Portland, Oregon, the last flight, Portland, SFO, and kind of home, touchdown or home run or whatever you call it, finally be here for the Rains Retreat. And so I was waiting, got taken there by Ajahn Siripanno and a lay person and dropped off. And there was a little delay, the flight, about an hour or so. And the airline made it very, very clear several times, both on the screens and in the announcement, this was not their fault. This was SFO, air traffic control, delaying the plane. We were all set to go. The plane was loaded up. They were ready to go, but they'd been held there. They have landing slots, landing times, and theirs had been pushed back. At first they weren't sure it was going to be as late as possibly 2 hours, and then they said, please stay here, because we might just suddenly get a new one, in which case we'll just get you on board quickly, and we've got to kind of close the doors and be off. So people, and I was kind of looking around, expecting to see that kind of airport anger, and actually it was very, very mild. People seemed sort of just resigned to it. And these days everyone has some kind of iPad or device anyway, so it seems to be whether you're on the plane or waiting in the lounge, it doesn't really make much difference. And then when you get when you meet your friends, you're still just on your devices. So, so, it's sort of, so no one seemed to care. And anyway, after about a few minutes, there was this kind of definite confirmed departure time, and it was a little bit earlier than we'd been told. At first, I think they tell you the worst possible scenario, so that then when it's a bit better, you feel, you get a little bit, oh, it's not that bad. So it was about an hour. It was fine. And in the meantime, I had to go out and I got some lunch, actually, because I would have missed my meal time in SFOs. Siddhanta was there, got me some bit of Starbucks, and then I went back in, and then within a few minutes got on the plane. So very smooth, very easy. For me, as a monk, it's very easy. We don't have time pressure. And so we were getting on the plane, and I was almost at the back seat, the back row. And as you know, at the back that's where there's a little place where there's often a flight attendant, the ones at the back, and there's some toilets there. So I sat down, and we were waiting on the tarmac. And then this woman, I guess in her 30s or something, and quite pregnant, quite heavily pregnant, walked up the aisle. This is while we're just still at the gate, and asked the flight attendant, a man, she said, can I use one of the toilets now? And he said, oh, geez, the pumps are all out, the toilets aren't working. And she just sort of looked, she was just a bit stopped by that. And then he goes, didn't they make an announcement outside, tell everyone to go before they got on the plane? And she goes, no. She goes, oh, jeez, I hate it when they do that. He said, don't worry, it's only a 2-hour flight, you'll be fine. And I was kind of, I was listening, because I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to make it. It's a 2-hour flight. I was thinking, is this serious, And then, of course, there's this pause, and there's this little twinkle in his eye, and he cracks up, and she cracks up, and she realizes he's been sort of winding her up. And, of course, the toilets are fine, and she can go in, and, it's kind of hard. And he goes, and he went, oh, and he was kind of laughing. He was like, oh, I really shouldn't do that. They've been telling me not to do that for ages. So it was a really kind of sweet kind of moment, sweet scene, and that sort of very personal, friendly, warm side of America that you don't get in England. Flight attendants aren't like that in England. Generally, they're much more sort of reserved, and so it's very nice being here. But I had this little, listening to that as well, and I had this little, kind of thought went off in my mind, because many years ago I read a book I think it's a man called Stephen Johnson, is like a journalist, and it's called Mind Wide Open. So it's one of those early kind of neuroscience kind of type books where somebody's seeing how the mind works, sort of rigging it up to things like CT scans and MRIs and EEGs and whatever. And why this journalist, I think he's actually a sports writer, decided to do a book on neuroscience was because he was in having some kind of scan done on his brain or on his head, and he cracked a joke, like a one-liner, to the doctor, which is his way of just commonly diffusing a bit of tension. And then a couple of minutes he did it again. The doctor asked him, just said, are you kind of like, do you like to make wisecracks? Is that something you do a lot? And he said, yes, it is. He said, that's a bit, that's my style, And the doctor said, this is amazing. Like this thing, every time twice, it just spiked, like went way off the scale. Like his brain waves, when he made this one-liner, so the doctor said, you just got this incredible hit there of dopamine or whatever it was. So this kind of opened up this journalist to then wanting to understand this, because he realized that part of his, what most people would perceive of as his character, his habit, his style, his thing, to make these one-liners, little deadpan or whatever, he was getting this real high off it. And so he realized that, that was part of it, and it was part of a kind of addiction pattern. So when this steward he makes his kind of jokes, and then he's kind of chiding himself, and he's like, God, I really shouldn't do that, they keep telling me to stop. Whether he was serious or not, you can kind of imagine that's his kind of thing, and then he gets a kind of a little a little boost off that. And of course it's nice because everyone likes the funny guy. It's a sort of personality which often develops at school. You know, you can be a bit the person who makes the irreverent comments. And then whatever you like, or you get whatever, you know, gives you a little boost, then naturally you do frequently. Whatever you do frequently, you get very good at. So if you ever thought, you know, why I say, you know, this whole thing about being talented, why are some people just so funny, they're so witty, they're sort of comic geniuses? Well, I mean, they're basically professionals, been doing it since they're kids, honing their style, honing their routine. And so you can be very spontaneous. It's basically a lot of what genius is about. And you've got to love it, that's the point. You've got to get this boost off it. And so I was wondering, I was sort of watching, you know, sitting on the plane, half looking at the beautiful Cascade Mountains as we were flying down, you know, from Portland to San Francisco. You pass by all these beautiful mountains, and then this flight attendant would be walking up and down doing his thing and basically cracking jokes all the way. You know, he's the kind of the funny guy. And, you know, it is nice. And then with me, I was thinking, okay, you know, what's he going to have for me? And then when he was collecting all the rubbish, the trash, in the big bag, I had all my kind of Starbucks containers of the meal I'd had on the plane. And so I, you know, being a monk, I'd, you know, finished every single morsel, every crumb, make sure I get it all in there. And so I was giving him these empty containers, and he kind of goes, you know, did you save any for me? Ha ha, you know, boom, boom, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, he's got all his lines. So, but you can see that, yeah, it's kind of nice. It's kind of a fun way, and kind of innocent enough to pass a job, and you're in that kind of service industry, and if it's balanced, it's nice. But again, it really made me think then, because so we're often dealing with craving. We're talking about craving. We're trying to go beyond craving. It's such a big part of our Buddhist practice, and the Buddha talks about it like kama tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha, craving for sensuality, craving for what is bhava, existence, being, becoming. Vibhava tanha, craving for non-existence, non-being, non-becoming, not wanting, you know, delight, aversion. We have all these ways of understanding it. And of course we have, and there are the very coarse, very clear areas that people, as we say, are working with. We have our things that we would say we crave, and I think addiction is a good synonym for craving, a very easy way of understanding it. And it sounds very strong, but addictions are very, very subtle as well. But there are the coarse ones in our life, obviously, and people in this world they're working with. As you know, it can be sexual things around food, whether it's if it's not, you know, really loving your food, it's anorexia. So it's all the whole realm around that, the sense realm. It can be anger, it can be you know, power, it can, you know, everything basically. I'm sure you're very, very familiar with. And then as we come to meditate, and beginning to really want to, say, self-improvement, or realize awareness or awakening or something really more profound, it's a lot more to do with our thoughts, our feelings, our moods. And, you know, most of you here are very familiar with the Dhamma now. We then understand about the 5 khandhas and the mind and body and these kind of things. And so we learn on more and more different levels how craving arises, and we understand the kilesas, greed, hatred, delusion, and a lot simply we feel when we're drawn towards something, and that feeling, I want that, and that feeling of aversion, I don't want that. And when we learn, okay, this is craving and vipassana. Today there was a woman from the Bay Area, vipassana practitioner, and straight away the conversation turned to craving, and she's talking about how she's been, you know, just working with craving and aversion, noticing that for the last 20, 30 years. So it's just part of the conversation now, especially being in this kind of circle. It's very nice. It's very nice to be part of the conversation. Now, the Buddha outlined it then in detail over his 40 years of teaching in so many different ways. And one of the ways you'd probably be familiar with how craving or suffering arises and passes away is in what's called dependent origination, where the Buddha teases out different aspects of our mental process. So there are things like what we call the 6 sense bases, which is basically eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then there's a thing called contact, where the eye sees something, and then it's sort of like as if there's kind of contact between an eye and a form. We call that sight. And that thing coming together is contact, and sight arises. And then that gives rise to something called a feeling, pleasant, painful, neutrals. And that gives rise to craving itself. So this is a bit what's often called the nexus at the heart of it. It's like the hub of this process. And then it's craving that gives rise to then the whole, the next step of the process, the wanting, the liking, the clinging, the grasping, and then the whole process goes on again and again. And we see this happening in our life. And Ajahn Chah had a lovely way of describing it. He said it's like you're falling out of a tree. You're on the top of a tree, and you fall out, and then bang, you land on the ground with a thud. And yes, you went past all those branches, but it just happened so quickly, you just hardly see it. So that's how he's, a sort of simple way of describing, that's how quick the process is. You see something, boom, the feeling arises, you like it or you don't like it, and as you know, before you know it, you're saying something, you're doing something. This is how the process goes. There's another way the Buddha described it, which I found, which was very, very eye-opening for me. Again, another little angle and another thing to think about. Because it's easy for us to say, see the things we crave, like everyone has a favorite food, and say, yeah, I crave that, or a favorite type of activity, or a favorite thing you hate, that your pet peeve, the thing you generally don't like. And then you can say, oh, I don't like that, that's that thing, and I have to work with that feeling of negativity. But in another list, another time, when the Buddha was talking about how craving arises, and craving passes away, what he calls tanha. Tanha literally means thirsting. It's this feeling of when you're thirsting, you thirst something, you want something. The list begins in a kind of usual way with eye as in the eye, and ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, and sight, sound, smells, taste, touches, and thoughts. So you crave eye, you crave those things, and then this process of consciousness, we're kind of used to that, and then the feelings that arise based on that. So we're used to that. Then the Buddha talks about the inclinations or the intentions, but then the Buddha says, craving for sights, craving for sounds, craving for... This is where craving arises. And when I first read that, something in me just really, really stopped. Because it's easy to miss it, especially sometimes you get these long lists of words and they all kind of sound very much the same. So just to say that again very slowly, that it's in craving for sights that craving arises and establishes itself. It's in craving for sounds that craving arises and establishes itself. It's in craving for smells that craving arises and establishes itself. It's in craving for tastes, for tangibles, touches, tactiles, and craving for thoughts that craving itself arises and establishes itself. So I'm not sure if you see the subtlety or an extra little flavor that gives, pointing to the fact that this process that we experience, which we're familiar with, that in itself is addictive. And most of us would say or would assume, yeah, I understand that craving is a source of dukkha, and I'm trying to abandon my cravings, without realizing just the very addictive nature, not of the things, not of, say, Facebook or the food you like or your aversions, but of that process. It's that which very quickly gives rise to that self-identity. And without that, often people feel literally, and will there be this emptiness? And where would you be without it's a sense of self, that sense of being alive, that sense of really being there is when craving is activated. Again, many years ago, I read something about quitting smoking. And I'm interested in this. I find it interesting because I was a smoker. So I went through that process again and again and again of giving up. And I finally had to ordain to give up. People ask me why I ordained. I finally quit smoking. But this person was saying, you're never going to be free from addiction until you realize, until you actually want to quit the addiction. So again, it's not the thing itself, it's the actual process of being addicted. That's what effectively is what it's all about. So it gives us another way of both, I think, understanding ourselves in a very, I'd say in a very honest way, that we're very much bound up with this process, whereby what fuels our whole, basically our existence and how we then begin to identify ourselves and lead our lives is somehow this need, this craving, this need to maintain our cravings. So if you've ever wondered why it's very difficult, say when you meditate, to say stay with your breath as opposed to lots of thinking. I mean, most people, this is a very, very common question. How do I, say, calm my mind? How do I still my mind? And again, this is a very simple comment was made to me by one of our teachers who visited here in April, Ajahn Siripanno. Many years ago, I asked him the same question. I said, Luang Por, I've been meditating so long, and I just still sometimes get caught up in proliferation. And he said, you'll never stop thinking until you stop delighting in thinking. All right? It just sounds so obvious, doesn't it? So basically saying, you think you want to stop thinking, but you don't. You love your thinking. Without your thinking, you're nobody. You're afraid to stop thinking. So it's not that you can't stop thinking in the sense that basically that thinking is so powerful, but that you need that. You still so. And I needed that realization that all these years of meditating, I hadn't really wanted to be meditating. It's a bit of a shocking. I thought I wanted to meditate, but I didn't. I wanted to do something, and meditation was bound up with it, and doing Buddhism was bound up with it, and maybe even getting enlightened was the goal, but it still involved a lot of thinking, and it didn't really involve much letting go, actually. Or it did externally, you would let go of, say, the precepts involves letting go, the coarser defilements, yes. But when it comes to actually stilling the mind on a more subtle level, I ask myself, do I actually consciously think there's more happiness in peace than being, say, me with my usual thoughts, as in me? And I realized I was deluding myself, or I thought I did, or I was pretending to, but deep down there was an obstruction to actually letting go into peace, into quietness. And so I realized, and that was when I remembered, I'm addicted to craving itself. So I want to share that with you because again, it's just a little shift, a little insight around this process. So in a sense, we're not stuck. That's effectively the good news. The Buddha says we are what's called tanha daso. Tanha daso is a compound which means a slave of craving. We chant it in the evening, chanting Buddha Sahamida Sowa, I am indeed the Buddha's servant. It's actually more powerful. It often means a slave. But I don't think if we chanted I am indeed the Buddha's slave, I don't think most people would come back second time round. So we chant servant. But the most powerful implication, it's the meaning it often has in the suttas, is a slave. So the Buddha uses this expression, slave of craving. So we have to be aware of that and really want to consciously free ourselves up from that. And the Buddha gives us lots of good advice, one step-by-step process he gives, or various factors. The Buddha says ways of abandoning it. One of them, the first one, is seeing. Seeing, ways to abandon the defilements, or craving if you like, is seeing. So partly seeing the process, seeing the Four Noble Truths, or just seeing this, that you're bound up with it, that this is how it arises, and this is it's through its letting go that it can pass away. Other tips are very useful, things like restraining. So as we know, those things that we are bound up with and we crave, it's true, you do have to restrain yourself. That's the sort of the external ways. So, we know what our bad habits are. On one level, it's a very simple process. Just don't do them, just don't do them. Sometimes you just have to grit your teeth the old-fashioned way and just say, no, I won't. And luckily they're habits, and as you know, habits can change. And there's a list of ways which we can work with this process. Another one is using. Well, in the monastery, we wisely reflecting. So we use food, we use the lodgings, we use basically the material realm in a wise way. So whatever you're going to use in life, use it wisely. Use it in a way which is for the reduction rather than the increase of craving. Sometimes the Buddha says you have to endure, enduring. Sometimes, again, a bit gritting your teeth, just putting up with difficult situations. You can't change the world, you can't change the situation you're in, or you don't want to suffer. Just learn how to endure and learn how to find peace with the enduring. Avoiding is another way. Sometimes you just have to avoid, like the first blessing, avoiding those of foolish ways. So avoiding unskillful people, unskillful things, difficult, unskillful situations that stimulate your craving again, that pull you back to square one. Removing. So this is more moving towards the process of meditation. We have our cravings, we have to learn then how to remove them. Again, that can be physically. Sometimes you have to throw away your iPhone if you just can't, there's nothing you can do, when you reach absolutely, you're at your wit's end, you sometimes have to get rid of stuff. Or at least there's certain apps that you really feel you have to remove. Uninstall, it's a great thing to do, I'm sure. But also just in terms of your own defilements, that's the process. Ultimately, it's about removing them. It's like internal. You can't fix, this path is not one where you get rid of the undesirable people and things in your life and then finally find happiness. That's not what it's about. It's internal. And then developing. The Buddha says that we walk this path through developing. And this is the word for bhavana, which is often translated as meditation. Meditation is so much more than just sitting down and doing some technique. It's the whole path of developing. Developing ourselves in body, speech, mind, through ethics, through concentration, through wisdom, cultivating the wholesome, abandoning the unwholesome. That's a whole lifetime's practice. And so ultimately then this, our goal, or a more immediate goal, what our teachers talk about a lot, the knowing, the awareness. And these things are very immediate. But partly we have to want, in a wholesome way, what Luang Por last week called chanda, it's zeal or enthusiasm. Do we want awareness? Do we want that peace? Do we want that stillness? These are the things the Buddha said not to fear. They're wishes, they're things that should not be feared. He said should be cultivated, these types of thoughts. Do we want them? And then are we really open to them? And in order to be open to awareness, we have to basically be willing to say goodbye to craving. So can you really say goodbye to those things? And it takes, actually that's the challenge. So somebody asked me, Daniel asked me before, what's the most difficult thing about being a monk? Externally, it's often very easy. A place like this, wonderful, great community, great food, great kuti, lovely place. It's not difficult. But carrying on the path of constantly looking in, seeing all these layers of craving, seeing how eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind interact with the external sense realm, the intentions, the thoughts, craving itself, and just wanting and having that continued application of mind to continually find the way. That's what's hard, or that's what's challenging. Although at the same time, it's not difficult. This is a very fortunate, very lucky, very enjoyable path to walk. But maintaining the application can certainly be challenging. And we all have things arising in our lives which can be obstacles. So these are some reflections on craving, and just to end off today, just to go back to my friend, the attendant there on Alaska Airlines. We sort of finally touched down in San Francisco. We were an hour late, which is fine. Everyone got off, and you can imagine they're on their schedule, so from there they have to fly somewhere else, and now they're late. So it's all rush, 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 and so they were kind of trying to get people off quickly. And being right at the back, in the back row, I was obviously the last person to get up. And I was walking off. I heard him sort of, calling out to the, flight attendants ahead. He more or less goes, "Okay, that's the last passenger," and he said, "Okay, load them up. We got to turn and burn." And so at the end of this, huge long travel that I'd been doing, I just had this feeling arose, this sort of sense of relief, that being able to come to a place and stay quietly for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, but also that thought, that's really what it's all about. That's what the craving is. I've been turning and burning, I don't know how long. And I was thinking, I'm really finally, ready to stop, I think. So it's a little sort of reflection on craving and how we can contemplate it and use it in our work with it in our daily life. So, end my little reflection there. And